The iron shackles around Teresa Kane's wrists felt heavier than the shame burning in her chest as she stood on the auction block in Muskogee, Oklahoma, watching her father stumble away with a bottle of whiskey clutched in his trembling hands. It was the summer of 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street where a crowd had gathered. Teresa's dark hair hung in tangled waves around her face, and her simple cotton dress was stained with dirt from the long journey into town. She was 20 years old, and until 3 days ago she had believed her father loved her enough to find another way. She had been wrong. "Gentlemen, we have here a healthy young woman, capable of cooking, cleaning, and all manner of domestic work," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Opening bid is $200 to settle the debt of one Martin Kane." Teresa's eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. She scanned the faces in the crowd, seeing leering men with tobacco-stained teeth, ranch owners assessing her like livestock, and merchants calculating her worth. Then her gaze landed on a tall figure standing at the back of the crowd, partially shadowed by the overhang of the general store. He was younger than most of the men bidding, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes so blue they were visible even from a distance. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, dark trousers, scuffed boots, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, and a worn leather vest. A hat hung down his back by its strap, and there was something in the set of his jaw that made Teresa's breath catch. 200, someone shouted. 225. Another voice called. The cowboy at the back did not move, but his eyes never left Teresa's face. She saw something there she had not expected to find in this crowd, something that looked almost like anger but not directed at her. 250. The bid came from a heavy-set man in an expensive suit who owned the lumber mill on the edge of town. Teresa had heard stories about him, about how his last 3 housekeepers had left in the middle of the night and never spoken of their time in his employment. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He pushed away from the post he had been leaning against and stepped into the sunlight. $300, he said, his voice clear and steady. The crowd turned to look at him, and Teresa saw several men exchange glances. The auctioneer squinted at the newcomer. "You got that kind of money, son." The cowboy walked forward, reaching into his vest pocket and pulling out a leather pouch. He loosened the drawstring and poured the contents into his palm, gold coins glinting in the afternoon sun. "I've got exactly $342, he said. "I am offering $300 for the lady's debt, and that is my final bid." The lumber mill owner scowled. $325. $350, the cowboy countered without hesitation. There was a long pause. The lumber mill owner looked at the cowboy, taking in his worn clothes and the determined set of his shoulders. Something in the younger man's eyes made him step back. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered, turning away. The auctioneer looked around the crowd. $350 going once, going twice. His gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Sold to the gentleman in the blue shirt." Teresa's legs felt weak as the auctioneer unlocked her shackles. The cowboy approached, counting out gold coins into the auctioneer's waiting hand. When the transaction was complete, the auctioneer handed him a piece of paper, the deed of debt that now made Teresa Kane the legal property of this stranger. The cowboy folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his pocket, then turned to face Teresa. Up close, she could see the sun-weathered lines around his eyes, the strong line of his nose, the way his mouth was set in a grim line. "Can you ride?" he asked. Teresa nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. My horse is tied up at the stable. We have got a ways to travel before dark." He did not reach for her arm or try to grab her. Instead, he simply turned and started walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Teresa hesitated for only a moment before falling into step behind him. What choice did she have? At least this man had kind eyes, and he had not looked at her the way the lumber mill owner had. That had to count for something. They walked in silence to the stable, where a large bay gelding stood tied to the hitching post. The horse nickered softly as they approached, and the cowboy ran a hand along its neck. "This is Ranger," he said. "He is a good horse, steady and calm. He will not give you any trouble." "I can ride," Teresa said quietly. "My father used to have horses before he sold them to pay for whiskey." The cowboy glanced at her, and she saw a flicker of something, sympathy perhaps, cross his face. "I am Isaac Winters," he said. "Most people call me Isaac." "Teresa Kane," she replied, though she supposed he already knew that. Isaac untied Ranger and swung up into the saddle with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He held out his hand to Teresa. "Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up." Teresa did as he said, and a moment later she was seated behind him on the horse, her arms awkwardly hovering at her sides. Isaac reached back and gently pulled her arms around his waist. "Hold on," he said. "It is about an hour's ride to my place." As they rode out of Muskogee, Teresa tried to process everything that had happened. Just 3 days ago, she had been living in the small cabin she shared with her father, tending their meager garden and trying to make their supplies stretch. Then the men had come, representatives of the saloon owner her father owed money to, and they had given Martin Kane a choice: pay his debt or hand over his daughter. Teresa had watched in horror as her father, red-eyed and shaking, had signed the papers that transferred ownership of her to the saloon owner, who had immediately announced his intention to auction her off to recoup his losses. Now she was pressed against the back of a stranger, riding toward an unknown future, with nothing to her name but the dress on her back and the last shreds of her dignity. The land around Muskogee was a mix of rolling prairie and dense woods, the green of summer just starting to fade to gold under the relentless Oklahoma sun. They followed a worn trail that wound through groves of oak and hickory, the horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust with each step. Isaac did not speak, and Teresa did not know what to say, so they rode in silence. After about an hour, they emerged from a line of trees into a small valley. Teresa saw a modest ranch spread out before them, a single-story wooden house with a covered porch, a barn that had been recently repaired, and several corrals holding horses. It was not grand, but it was well maintained, and there was a sense of care in the way everything was arranged. "This is the Winters Ranch," Isaac said as they approached. "It is not much, but it is mine. My father left it to me when he passed 2 years ago." They rode up to the house, and Isaac dismounted, then helped Teresa down. Her legs were unsteady after the ride, and she swayed slightly. Isaac's hand steadied her elbow, then quickly released her. "You must be hungry," he said. "Come inside and I will fix us something to eat." The interior of the house was simple but clean. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs, and a few pieces of sturdy furniture. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. Teresa stood uncertainly in the doorway while Isaac moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out supplies. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the table. "You do not have to stand there like that." Teresa sat, her hands folded in her lap, watching as Isaac efficiently prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold beef. He set a plate in front of her and took a seat across the table. For a moment, they both just sat there, the weight of the situation hanging between them. Finally, Isaac reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the folded paper, the deed of debt that made Teresa his property. He held it for a moment, staring at it, then stood and walked to the fireplace. Teresa watched, confused, as he struck a match and held it to the corner of the paper. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Isaac did not answer until the paper was fully engulfed in flames. He dropped it onto the hearth and watched it burn to ash, then turned to face her. "You are free," he said simply. "I did not buy you to own you, Teresa. I bought you to free you." Teresa stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "I do not understand." Isaac sat back down at the table, leaning forward with his elbows on the worn wood. "I lost my mother when I was 12, he said. "My father raised me alone, and he taught me that every person has worth, regardless of their circumstances. When I saw you standing up there today, I saw the fear in your eyes, and I saw the men bidding on you like you were no more than a horse or a cow. I could not let that stand." "But you spent all your money," Teresa said, her mind reeling. $350. "That must have been everything you had." "Not quite everything," Isaac said with a slight smile. "I've got about $20 left and a ranch full of horses I am training to sell. I will be fine." Teresa felt the tears she had been holding back finally break free, sliding down her cheeks in hot trails. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Isaac's blue eyes met hers, and she saw nothing but sincerity there. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because no person should be owned by another. Because you deserved better than what your father did to you." Teresa wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Isaac replied, "but I do need to explain your situation. The deed is burned, which means legally you are no longer bound to me or to anyone. You are free to go wherever you want, do whatever you want. However, I know you have no money and no place to go. So I am offering you a job if you want it. I need help around here. Cooking, mending, keeping the house, maybe helping with the horses if you are willing. I will pay you fair wages and you will have your own room. If you decide you want to leave, you can do so at any time, no questions asked." Teresa looked around the simple house, then back at Isaac's honest face. She had nowhere else to go. No family except a father who had sold her for drinking money. No skills beyond the domestic work she had learned growing up. But more than that, she felt something stirring in her chest, a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this stranger with kind eyes and a burned deed was exactly what he appeared to be. "I will stay," she said, "at least for now, and I will work hard to earn my keep." Isaac smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face and made him look younger. "That is all I can ask." They ate their simple meal in more comfortable silence, and afterward, Isaac showed Teresa to the smaller of the two bedrooms. It held a narrow bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, and a washstand with a chipped porcelain basin. Compared to the crowded cabin she had shared with her father, it felt like luxury. "I will let you get settled," Isaac said from the doorway. "There is water in the pitcher, and I will bring you some clean clothes that belong to my mother. They might be a bit old-fashioned, but they will be cleaner than what you have got on." "Thank you," Teresa said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, lying in the narrow bed in a house that smelled of wood smoke and leather, Teresa stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of her new reality. She was free, truly free, for the first time in 3 days. And she owed that freedom to a cowboy who had spent his life savings to buy and then immediately burn a piece of paper. She fell asleep with the image of Isaac's blue eyes in her mind, and for the first time in weeks, she did not have nightmares. The next morning, Teresa woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through the small window. She dressed in one of the dresses Isaac had left for her, a simple blue cotton that was indeed old-fashioned but clean and well-made. It fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the shoulders. When she emerged from her room, she found Isaac already up and dressed, standing at the stove. "Good morning," he said. "I was just making coffee. Do you drink it?" "Yes, thank you." Teresa moved to the kitchen area. "But you should not be making breakfast. That is what you are paying me for, is it not?" Isaac poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "I figured your first day, I would help you get oriented. After that, the kitchen is all yours." They spent the morning with Isaac showing Teresa around the ranch. He had about 20 horses in various stages of training, from barely broken colts to calm, steady mounts ready for sale. He worked with them every day, he explained, gentling them and teaching them to respond to commands. It was hard work, but he loved it. "My father started this ranch with nothing but a dream and a single mare," Isaac said as they stood by the fence watching a young sorrel colt trot around the corral. "He built it up horse by horse, year by year. When he died, I promised myself I would keep it going, make him proud." "I think you are doing that," Teresa said softly. Isaac glanced at her, and something passed between them, a connection that made Teresa's heart beat a little faster. Then he cleared his throat and looked away. "We should head back. I need to ride out to check the fence line on the eastern pasture, and you probably want to get familiar with the house." The days settled into a rhythm. Teresa woke early and prepared breakfast, then spent her days cleaning, mending, and preparing meals. In the afternoons, she would often watch Isaac work with the horses, fascinated by his patience and skill. He never raised his voice or his hand to the animals, instead using quiet persistence and gentle encouragement to shape their behavior. In the evenings, they would eat dinner together at the wooden table, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Isaac told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's wisdom and his mother's laugh. Teresa, more hesitantly, shared stories of her childhood before her mother died, before her father discovered that whiskey could dull the pain of loss. "He was not always like that," she said one evening, 3 weeks after her arrival. "When I was young, he was kind. He used to take me riding and teach me the names of all the birds, but after my mother passed, he just gave up. He stopped trying." Isaac listened without judgment, his blue eyes steady on her face. "Grief does strange things to people," he said, "but that does not excuse what he did to you." "No," Teresa agreed quietly. "It does not." As summer faded into early autumn, Teresa found herself thinking about Isaac more and more. She noticed the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck when it got too long, the way his hands, so firm and capable with the horses, were always gentle when he passed her a plate or held a door. She noticed the sound of his laugh, rare but wonderful when it came, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, that any woman would feel kindly toward a man who had saved her from a terrible fate. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was falling in love with Isaac Winters, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. One afternoon, in late September, Teresa was hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from the main corral. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. When she rounded the corner of the barn, she saw Isaac in the corral with a large black stallion, a new acquisition he had been trying to gentle for the past week. The horse was rearing and bucking, its eyes wild with fear, and Isaac was trying to calm it with his voice and his body language. But something had spooked the animal badly, and it was not responding to his usual methods. "Isaac, get out of there!" Teresa shouted, but her voice seemed to make things worse. The stallion reared again, its hooves flailing dangerously close to Isaac's head. Isaac dove to the side, rolling in the dirt and coming up in a crouch. He was breathing hard, his hat knocked off and his shirt torn, but he seemed unhurt. The stallion continued to buck and kick, slamming itself against the fence rails in its panic. Teresa ran to the gate and fumbled with the latch. Isaac saw what she was doing and sprinted toward her. He slipped through the gate just as the stallion charged, its hooves striking the wood where he had been standing a second before. Teresa slammed the gate shut and threw the latch, then turned to Isaac. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, her hands reaching for him before she could think better of it. Isaac caught her hands in his, and suddenly they were standing very close, both breathing hard, staring at each other. "I am fine," he said, his voice rough. "That was foolish of me. I should have seen he was not ready." "You could have been killed," Teresa said, and she heard the tremor in her own voice. "But I was not," Isaac replied. His hands were still holding hers, warm and strong, and he was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Teresa, Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. They both turned to see 3 riders approaching the ranch, and Isaac's expression shifted from whatever emotion had been there to something harder, more cautious. He released Teresa's hands and moved to meet the visitors. The lead rider was a man in his 50s with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. The 2 men flanking him were younger, both wearing guns and expressions that suggested they knew how to use them. "Isaac Winters," the sheriff called as they reined in their horses. "That is me," Isaac replied, his voice steady. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" The sheriff dismounted, his eyes moving from Isaac to Teresa and back again. "I am Sheriff Dalton from Muskogee. I am looking for a young woman named Teresa Kane. I was told she might be here." Teresa felt her blood turn to ice. Isaac stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle movement that nonetheless put his body between her and the sheriff. "What is this about?" Isaac asked. Sheriff Dalton pulled a piece of paper from his saddlebag. "I've got a complaint here from Martin Kane, saying his daughter was taken from town against her will. He is demanding her return." Teresa found her voice, though it shook. "That is a lie. My father sold me to pay his debts. This man," she gestured to Isaac, "bought my debt and freed me." "I am here of my own free will." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That is an interesting story, Miss Kane, but your father says different. He says you were coerced, that he never agreed to any sale." "He is lying," Teresa said, her voice growing stronger with anger. "He signed the papers himself. The auctioneer in town can verify it." Isaac spoke up. "Sheriff, I have witnesses who saw the auction. I paid $350 for Miss Kane's debt in front of dozens of people. If her father wants to claim otherwise, he is the liar, not us." Sheriff Dalton studied them both for a long moment. "I heard about that auction," he said finally. "Caused quite a stir in town, but I also know Martin Kane, and while he is a drunk, I have got to follow up on his complaint." "What are you asking?" Isaac said, his jaw tight. "I need Miss Kane to come back to town with me and make a formal statement," the sheriff replied. "If what you are saying is true, there will be no problem, but I have got to do this by the book." Teresa felt panic rising in her chest. The thought of going back to town, of facing her father again, made her feel sick, but she also knew running would only make things worse. "I will go," she said quietly, "but I want Isaac to come with me." The sheriff nodded. "That is fair. We will leave in the morning. In the meantime, I would appreciate it if you folks would let me and my deputies camp on your property tonight. That way everyone stays honest." Isaac did not look happy, but he agreed. That evening was tense, with the sheriff and his men camped near the barn while Isaac and Teresa remained in the house. They barely spoke during dinner, both lost in their own worried thoughts. Finally, as darkness fell and Teresa was preparing to retreat to her room, Isaac spoke. "Teresa, I want you to know something. Whatever happens tomorrow, I will not let anyone take you against your will. You are free and you will stay free. I promise you that." Teresa looked at him, at the fierce determination in his eyes, and felt something break open in her chest. "Isaac, I do not want to leave here. I do not want to leave you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Isaac crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands in his, the same way he had that afternoon by the corral. "You do not have to leave," he said. "This is your home for as long as you want it to be." "It is more than that," Teresa whispered. "You are more than that. Isaac, I think I am falling in love with you." She saw the shock register in his eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like joy. "Teresa," he breathed. "I have been trying not to feel this way, trying to give you space and time after everything you have been through. But I cannot help it. I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing on that auction block, looking so scared but so brave." Teresa felt tears welling in her eyes, but this time they were happy tears. "Truly, truly," Isaac said, and then he was pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was something precious. Teresa buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and horses and honest work, feeling safer than she had in months. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, until finally Isaac pulled back enough to look down at her face. "We should sleep," he said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Teresa nodded, but before she could step away, Isaac bent his head and kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise. It was Teresa's first kiss, and it was everything she had ever dreamed a kiss could be. The next morning, they rode into Muskogee with Sheriff Dalton and his deputies. Teresa rode behind Isaac on Ranger again, her arms around his waist, drawing strength from his solid presence. When they arrived in town, they went directly to the sheriff's office, a small wooden building on the main street. Inside, Teresa was not surprised to see her father waiting, slumped in a chair with the stink of whiskey heavy on his breath. He looked up as they entered, and his bloodshot eyes fixed on Teresa. "There she is," he said, his voice slurred. "There is my daughter stolen away by that cowboy." "I was not stolen," Teresa said coldly. "You sold me, father. You signed the papers and took the money, and then you drank it away just like you drink everything away." Martin Kane's face flushed red. "You are my daughter. I have got a right to you." "You gave up that right when you put me on an auction block," Teresa shot back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Sheriff Dalton held up a hand. "Now let us all calm down and figure this out. Martin, do you deny that you signed papers transferring your debt to your daughter?" Martin Kane looked away, his jaw working. "I was drunk. I did not know what I was doing." "But you did sign the papers," the sheriff pressed. "Yes, but I did not mean it. I want my daughter back." Isaac spoke up, his voice hard. "You do not want your daughter, Kane. You want someone to take care of you, to clean up after you and cook your meals while you drink yourself to death. That is not going to happen. Teresa is an adult, free to make her own choices, and she chooses not to be with you." Martin Kane struggled to his feet, swaying. "She is my blood. She belongs with me." "I belong to myself," Teresa said firmly. "And I choose to stay with Isaac. You are not my father anymore. A father would never have done what you did." She saw something flicker in Martin Kane's eyes, something that might have been shame or regret, but it was quickly drowned by the stubborn anger of a drunk. "Sheriff, are you going to let them do this?" Sheriff Dalton sighed. "Martin, your daughter is 20 years old. According to the law, she is old enough to make her own decisions. You signed papers transferring your debt to her, and this man paid that debt. Legally, there is nothing I can do." "What about morally?" Martin Kane demanded. "She is my daughter." "Morally, you lost the right to call her that when you sold her," the sheriff replied, his voice hard. Now I suggest you get yourself together and leave these folks alone. If I hear you have been bothering them, I will have you arrested for harassment. Do you understand me?" Martin Kane stared at the sheriff, then at Teresa. For a moment she thought he might say something, might apologize or beg for forgiveness. But then his face hardened and he turned away. "Fine, keep her. She was never worth the trouble anyway." The words hurt, even though Teresa had expected them. Isaac's hand found hers and squeezed gently, reminding her that she was not alone. "We are done here," Sheriff Dalton said. "Miss Kane, you are free to go. And Martin, I better not see you out at the Winters Ranch. You hear me?" They left the office, emerging into the bright morning sunlight. Teresa felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was truly free now in every sense of the word. No debt, no father, no chains holding her to a past she wanted to forget. Isaac helped her mount Ranger, then swung up behind her this time, wrapping one arm around her waist as he took the reins with the other. "Let us go home," he murmured into her ear, and Teresa felt a thrill run through her at the word. Home. The ride back to the ranch seemed shorter than the ride in, and when they arrived, Isaac helped Teresa down and then just stood there, holding her, his forehead resting against hers. "I was so scared," he admitted. "I was terrified they would find some legal reason to take you away." "But they did not," Teresa said, reaching up to cup his cheek with her hand. "I am here and I am free and I am yours if you want me." "I want you," Isaac said fervently. "Teresa, I want you more than I have ever wanted anything in my life, but I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, give you time to be sure this is what you want." Teresa smiled. "I am sure. But if you want to court me, I will not say no." So Isaac courted her. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie and taught her to ride her own horse, a gentle mare named Daisy that he had been training specifically for her. He took her on picnics by the creek that ran through the eastern part of his property, and they would sit on a blanket and talk for hours about everything and nothing. In the evenings after dinner, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, and Isaac would tell her stories about the stars, the same stories his mother had told him when he was a child. Sometimes he would play a battered harmonica his father had given him, filling the air with sweet, melancholy melodies. Teresa had never been so happy. She felt like she was discovering who she truly was, freed from the burden of caring for her father and worrying about his debts. She learned that she loved working with the horses, and Isaac began teaching her how to gentle and train them. She had a natural touch, he said, a calmness that the animals responded to. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the first stars appear, Isaac took Teresa's hand. "I have something I want to ask you," he said, and there was a nervous tremor in his voice that Teresa had never heard before. "What is it?" she asked, turning to face him. Isaac slid off his chair and onto one knee, and Teresa's heart began to race. "Teresa Kane, I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. You have brought light and joy into my life, and I cannot imagine spending another day without you. Will you marry me?" Teresa felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." Isaac pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small blue stone set in it. "This was my mother's," he said. "My father gave it to her when they got engaged. I would be honored if you would wear it." He slipped the ring onto Teresa's finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "Every day for the rest of our lives. I will do everything in my power to make you happy." "You already do," Teresa replied, and she meant it with all her heart. They were married in November in a simple ceremony at the small church in Muskogee. Teresa wore a dress borrowed from the preacher's wife, and Isaac wore his best suit, carefully brushed and pressed. There were not many guests, just a few neighbors from surrounding ranches and some of the townspeople who had come to know and respect Isaac. Martin Kane did not attend, and Teresa did not mourn his absence. She had made her peace with losing her father. He had made his choices, and now she was making hers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that Teresa felt her heart might burst. As they walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, she looked up at her new husband and saw her entire future shining in his eyes. Their wedding night was spent in the ranch house that was now truly their home together. Isaac was patient and gentle, mindful that this was all new to Teresa. He took his time, showing her with touch and whispered words how much he loved her, how precious she was to him. Teresa, for her part, gave herself to him fully, holding nothing back, trusting him with every part of herself. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Isaac's bed, which was now their bed, and talked late into the night about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the ranch," Isaac said, running his fingers through Teresa's dark hair. "Maybe buy some cattle, diversify beyond just the horses. And I want to build a bigger house, something with proper rooms for a family." "A family?" Teresa asked, her heart skipping a beat. Isaac smiled. "If that is what you want, I would love to have children with you, Teresa, sons and daughters with your beauty and your strength." "I would like that," Teresa said softly. "I would like that very much." The winter of 1878 was mild by Oklahoma standards, and Teresa and Isaac spent the short days working on the ranch and the long nights learning each other. By early spring, Teresa realized she was pregnant, and the joy on Isaac's face when she told him was something she would remember for the rest of her life. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hands moving to her still flat belly. "As certain as I can be," Teresa replied. "The baby should come in late summer or early fall." Isaac pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said into her hair. "I love you so much." The pregnancy was not easy. Teresa suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and as the summer heat intensified, she found it harder to move and work. But Isaac was attentive and caring, taking over many of her chores and making sure she rested as much as possible. In August, Isaac hired a midwife from town to stay with them for the last few weeks of the pregnancy. Mrs. Thompson was a weathered woman in her 60s with capable hands and a no-nonsense manner, but she was kind to Teresa and helped ease her fears about the upcoming birth. On a hot night in early September, Teresa's labor began. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Isaac paced the main room of the house, listening to Teresa's cries and feeling helpless and terrified. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set on the second day, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Thompson emerged from the bedroom, wiping her hands on a towel, a smile on her weathered face. "Congratulations, Mr. Winters, you have a son." Isaac felt his knees go weak with relief. "Teresa, she is tired but fine. Go on in and meet your boy." Isaac entered the bedroom to find Teresa propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale, but her eyes shining as she looked down at the small bundle in her arms. She looked up as Isaac approached, and the smile she gave him was radiant. "Isaac, meet your son." Isaac sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a wisp of dark hair and was making small, snuffling sounds as he rooted against Teresa's chest. Isaac felt a wave of love so intense it nearly brought him to his tears. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered. What should we name him? They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, and Teresa said softly, "I was thinking we could name him after your father." "What was his name?" "James," Isaac said. "James Robert Winters." "Then that is what we will call him," Teresa said. "James Robert Winters." Little James grew quickly, a healthy, robust baby who had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Isaac proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried at night and making silly faces to earn the baby's first smiles. The ranch continued to prosper. Isaac's reputation as a skilled horse trainer spread, and he found himself with more business than he could handle. By the time James was a year old, Isaac had saved enough to begin building the larger house he had dreamed of. The new house took shape over the course of a year. A 2-story structure with a proper parlor, a large kitchen, 4 bedrooms, and even an indoor bathroom, a luxury that was rare in rural Oklahoma in 1880. Teresa watched it rise from the foundation with a sense of wonder, barely able to believe this was her life now. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, they moved into the new house. James was toddling by then, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of a young child. Teresa was pregnant again, this time with a daughter who would be born in the spring of 1881. They named her Sarah, after Teresa's mother, and she had Teresa's dark eyes and Isaac's stubborn chin. James was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Isaac would laugh and say that his son was going to be a natural father himself someday. The years passed in a blur of happiness. The ranch grew and prospered. They added cattle to their operations, just as Isaac had dreamed, and hired a few ranch hands to help with the work. Teresa managed the household and the finances, discovering she had a head for numbers and business. They had one more child, a son they named Thomas, born in 1883. By then, James was 5 and Sarah was 2, and the house was full of laughter and noise and the chaotic joy of a young family. Sometimes, in the evenings after the children were asleep, Teresa and Isaac would sit on the porch of their beautiful home and watch the sun set over the land they had built together. Teresa would think back to that day in 1878 when she had stood on an auction block in Muskogee, certain her life was over, and she could barely believe how far she had come. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac would ask, his arm around her shoulders. "About how lucky I am," Teresa would reply. "About how you saved me." Isaac would shake his head. "You saved yourself, Teresa. I just gave you the opportunity." But Teresa knew better. Isaac had not just given her an opportunity. He had given her freedom and love and a life beyond her wildest dreams. He had burned the paper that bound her and called her free, and in doing so, he had freed both of them to find a love neither had been looking for. In 1885, when James was 7, Sarah was 4, and Thomas was 2, Teresa's father died. She received word from the sheriff in Muskogee that Martin Kane had been found dead in a boarding house, his liver finally giving out after years of abuse. They asked if she wanted to claim the body and arrange for a burial. Teresa thought about it for a long time. Part of her wanted to refuse, to let Martin Kane be buried in a pauper's grave as he deserved. But another part of her remembered the man he had been before her mother died, the father who had taken her riding and taught her about birds. In the end, she and Isaac traveled to Muskogee and arranged for a simple burial. Teresa did not cry at the graveside. She had done all her crying for her father years ago. Instead, she said a quiet goodbye to the man he could have been and then turned and walked away, Isaac's hand firm and steady in hers. "Are you all right?" Isaac asked as they rode back toward the ranch. "I am," Teresa said, and she realized it was true. "I am sad for what he could have been, for the life he wasted, but I am not sad for me. I have everything I need." Isaac squeezed her hand. "As do I." The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew tall and strong, learning to work with horses just like his father. He had Isaac's patience and Teresa's empathy, and by the time he was 12, he could gentle a green horse better than most grown men. Sarah was bright and curious, always reading when she could get her hands on a book. Teresa taught her to read and write, and Isaac made sure the traveling bookseller always stopped at their ranch when he came through the area. Sarah devoured every book she could find, from adventure stories to technical manuals on animal husbandry. Thomas was the wild child, always getting into scrapes and coming home with torn clothes and scraped knees. But he had a heart of gold and a fierce love for his family, and he made them all laugh with his antics and stories. In 1890, when they had been married 12 years, Teresa and Isaac celebrated by taking their family on a trip to Oklahoma City, which was growing rapidly after the land run the previous year. The children were amazed by the bustling city, so different from their quiet ranch, and they spent 3 wonderful days exploring and shopping and eating at restaurants. On the last night of their trip, after the children were asleep in their hotel room, Isaac and Teresa took a walk through the streets. The air was warm and sweet, and the sounds of music drifted from a nearby saloon. "You ever regret it?" Teresa asked suddenly. "Spending all that money to free me. Think of what else you could have done with $350. Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Teresa Winters, I have never regretted it for a single moment. That $350 bought me the greatest treasure of my life. It bought me you, and through you, our children and our family, and every moment of happiness I have known since that day. I would spend it again 1,000 times over." Teresa felt tears welling in her eyes. Even after all these years, Isaac could still make her heart flutter with his words. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," Isaac replied, pulling her close and kissing her right there on the street, not caring who might see. "Forever and always." They returned to the ranch renewed and ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. And there were challenges. In 1893, a drought struck Oklahoma, and they lost a quarter of their cattle herd. But they weathered it together, cutting back on expenses and working harder than ever to keep the ranch going. In 1895, James turned 17 and announced that he wanted to go to agricultural college in Kansas. Teresa was torn between pride in her son's ambition and sadness at the thought of him leaving. But Isaac encouraged the boy, even though it would mean losing his best ranch hand. "Let him go," Isaac said to Teresa as they discussed it late one night. "Let him learn and grow. He will come back to us. This ranch will always be his home." And Isaac was right. James went off to college, and 2 years later Sarah followed, determined to become a teacher. Thomas stayed on the ranch, having no interest in leaving the land he loved. He proved to be even more skilled with cattle than his father, with an uncanny ability to predict weather patterns and know when to move the herd. In 1900, James returned from college with a degree and a wife, a sweet-natured young woman named Elizabeth who took to ranch life with surprising ease. They built a house on the eastern part of the property, and James began implementing new breeding techniques he had learned in school. The quality of their horses and cattle improved dramatically. Sarah came home in 1902 with her teaching certificate and took a position at the small school that had been built in the growing town of Broken Arrow, just a few miles from the ranch. She continued to live at home, riding her horse to school each day, and in the evenings she would read to her parents from the latest books and newspapers. Thomas married in 1903, choosing a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property. Her name was Catherine, and she was as tough and capable as any man. She and Thomas made a formidable team, and they built their own house on the western edge of the Winters Ranch. By 1905, Isaac and Teresa had 6 grandchildren between their 3 children, with more on the way. The ranch had grown to encompass over 3,000 acres, and the Winters name was respected throughout Oklahoma. Isaac was 52 years old now, his dark hair streaked with silver, but he was still strong and vital, still working with horses every day. Teresa was 47, and though she had some gray in her dark hair and lines around her eyes, she was as beautiful to Isaac as she had been the day he first saw her. They were sitting on their porch one evening in late spring, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, when Teresa said, "Do you remember the first night I spent here, when you burned that paper and told me I was free?" "I remember every moment of that day," Isaac replied. "How could I forget? It was the day my life truly began." Teresa leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was so scared. I did not know what would happen to me. And then you did something so unexpected, so kind, that I could barely believe it was real." "It was real," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And look at what came from it. Look at what we built." Teresa looked out over the sprawling ranch, at the house where their children had grown up, at the barns and corrals where 3 generations now worked side by side. She thought about the grandchildren who called her grandmother and climbed into her lap for stories. She thought about the life she and Isaac had created from nothing but courage and love and burned paper. "We built something beautiful," she said softly. "We built everything," Isaac replied. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple, Teresa thought about the girl she had been, standing on an auction block in 1878, and the woman she had become. She thought about the cowboy who had spent his life savings to free her, and how that single act of kindness had changed both their lives forever. She thought about freedom and what it really meant. It was not just the absence of chains or the burning of a legal document. It was the ability to choose your own path, to love who you wanted to love, to build the life you dreamed of. It was the knowledge that you belonged to yourself and to the people you chose to share your life with. In 1908, Isaac and Teresa celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a huge party that brought together their entire extended family and friends from all over the territory. Their children and grandchildren filled the house with laughter and love, and as Teresa looked around at all the faces, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unlikely path that had brought her to this moment. James, now 30 years old, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me what love really means, who showed me that the greatest strength is kindness and that the truest wealth is family. Thank you for building a home where we always knew we were loved and valued. Thank you for teaching us to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard. And thank you for being an example of what a real marriage should look like." Teresa wiped tears from her eyes as Isaac pulled her close. "Hear, hear," echoed around the room, and she felt overwhelmed by the love surrounding her. That night, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet, Isaac and Teresa lay in their bed, holding hands in the darkness. 30 years, Isaac murmured. "It feels like yesterday and forever all at the same time." "I know what you mean," Teresa replied. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that you are my husband, that we have this family, this ranch, this beautiful life." "Believe it," Isaac said, rolling onto his side to face her. Even in the dim moonlight coming through the window, she could see the love in his eyes. "You deserve every bit of it, Teresa. You deserve the world." "I have the world," Teresa said, "right here with you." The years continued their steady march forward. Oklahoma became a state in 1907, and the Winters Ranch adapted to the changing times. They got electricity in 1910, and in 1912, they bought their first automobile, a Model T Ford that Thomas learned to drive and maintain. Sarah married a lawyer from Tulsa in 1910 and moved to the city, but she came home often with her husband and children. James and Elizabeth had 5 children in total, 3 boys and 2 girls, all of them learning to ride almost before they could walk. Thomas and Catherine had 4 children, tough as nails and just as capable as their parents. By 1918, Isaac was 65 and Teresa was 60. The Great War was raging in Europe, and they had sent 2 grandsons off to fight. The waiting and worrying aged them both, but they held on to each other and their faith that their boys would come home. And they did, both of them in 1919, changed by what they had seen but alive. The family celebrated their return with tears and laughter and profound gratitude. In 1920, women got the right to vote, and Teresa cast her ballot with pride, thinking about how far she had come from the girl who had been sold to pay a debt. She voted for politicians who supported workers' rights and human dignity, and she taught her granddaughters that they had power and worth, and should never let anyone tell them otherwise. Isaac retired from active ranch work in 1922, though he still spent every day with the horses he loved. James had taken over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, and he was doing an excellent job. Isaac was content to advise and support, and to spend his evenings on the porch with Teresa, talking about their life and their memories. In the spring of 1928, on a warm April evening, Isaac and Teresa sat together watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Isaac was 75 now, his hair completely white, his once strong body bent with age. But his blue eyes were still clear and bright, and when he looked at Teresa, she still saw the young cowboy who had saved her. "I have been thinking," Isaac said slowly, "about that day in Muskogee 50 years ago now. Do you know what I was thinking when I saw you on that auction block?" "What?" Teresa asked, curious. In all their years together, he had never told her this. "I was thinking that you looked like the bravest person I had ever seen," Isaac said. "Standing up there, scared but refusing to cry, refusing to show weakness. And I thought to myself that anyone with that much courage deserved a chance at freedom, deserved a chance at happiness." Teresa felt tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. "You gave me more than a chance. You gave me everything." "No," Isaac said gently. "You gave me everything. You gave me a reason to be better, to work harder, to build something meaningful. You gave me love and family and a life worth living. I was just a lonely cowboy with a horse ranch before you came along. You made me who I am." "We made each other," Teresa said, taking his hand. "Together." Isaac smiled and brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Together," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Around them, they could hear the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, horses nickering, cattle lowing, the distant laughter of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It was a symphony of life, Teresa thought, a testament to what could be built from a single act of kindness and courage. From a burned piece of paper and the word free. Isaac lived 5 more years, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1933 at the age of 80. Teresa held his hand as he took his last breath and whispered that she would love him forever. The funeral brought together 4 generations of the family he had helped create, and as they laid him to rest in the small cemetery on the ranch, Teresa stood surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them living proof of the love Isaac had given her. Teresa lived another 15 years after Isaac's death, remaining sharp and active well into her 80s. She spent her time with her family, telling stories of the old days to anyone who would listen. She told them about standing on an auction block in 1878, about a cowboy who had saved her, about a piece of paper burning in a fireplace, and the word that had changed her life forever: free. When Teresa passed away in 1948 at the age of 90, she was buried next to Isaac in the cemetery on the ranch they had built together. Her tombstone reads simply, Teresa Kane Winters, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, born in chains, lived in freedom, died in love. The Winters Ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, a living monument to the power of kindness and the transformative nature of true love. And though the world changed dramatically over the decades, becoming almost unrecognizable from the Wild West of 1878, the story of Isaac and Teresa remained constant, told and retold at family gatherings, a reminder that one person's courage and compassion could change everything. In the end, it was a simple story. A girl sold to pay her father's debt, a cowboy who burned the paper and called her free. Two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, echoing through generations, proving that the greatest riches in life are not measured in gold but in love, in family, in the courage to do what is right even when it is hard. And somewhere in the warm Oklahoma nights, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echo of that long-ago conversation on a ranch house porch. Two voices mingling in the darkness, speaking words of love that time itself could not diminish. Together, they whisper to the stars, forever together.